So, morning, there have been some concerns that have been raised about how the clients might react to who the potential winner will be in the end. What is your understanding of what the possible reaction could be from Satyam clients? I mean, does Tech Mahindra as a face alleviate the pressure, or do you think they would be more concerned and would have been happier to see a face like L&T Info, in which there's greater overlap of businesses, or greater synergy, I should say?
I would believe that, the customers who were at one time very concerned, and similarly employees, they did take their decisions, and, some of them did move on. But I think the rest of them had faith in Satyam and also the process that was being followed after that. And I would believe that those customers would remain. They would have also heaved a sigh of relief. Of course, it would depend upon the new management as to what kind of a message they give. But I would think if I was a customer, I would be very happy that this process is over and that there is finality, that Satyam gets a home somewhere.
We have been given to understand, though, Som, that there has been, if not considerable, a certain amount of loss of business for Satyam over the past 3 months because of the events and the way they unfolded. Would you say there might be a need for Tech Mahindra to now recalibrate the employee size of Satyam?
Well, over this last 3 to 4 months, some part of that calibration has been going on. The industry itself is going through, I would say, a difficult time given the downturn worldwide. So there would be some calibration that will go on. There will be some synergies that the two companies would have to see where they take it. But by and large, from a customer perspective, so if, for example, it is Tech Mahindra, right, they're fairly focused on telecom, they're more focused on Europe, Satyam would bring them a better footprint in some manners, would give them business which is non-telecom. So I think there are similar benefits, and if it was any other bidder, I'm sure they would have found this similar kind of synergy. So over the size that Satyam used to be, I think the few customers who went out and took those choices, we've also seen some new business coming in. So I think the board did a very good job in able to be able to convince. We from NASSCOM were constantly in touch with analysts and customers and others where they sought our views as well. So I think we should all be, as corporate India, as I said before, be pleased that everybody acted very swiftly, and in 3 months' time, event as significant as Satyam is behind us now.
So what about employees? They have been going through a very, very uncertain 3 months. Some have left, but it wasn't a huge exodus of the client force. Do you think this development will be welcomed by the employees and they will believe that their jobs are not at risk? Or do you think Tech Mahindra, after taking over, will discover that a large part of the workforce is unutilized and therefore they would want to rationalize that workforce?
See, there are two aspects. I think from an employee perspective as well, they should be welcoming this because they become part of an organization where they can combine, build credibility. The issue was that Satyam in its existing form would have found it very difficult to build credibility across, and hence finding a new home was good. And any of these companies are, have value-based. I think the employees would really welcome it. To the point of, utilization and so on, that's an issue that's across the country. Almost every large, small, medium-sized company is faced with this issue where they're improving their efficiency and utilization ratios. But a lot of that has probably already happened in the last 3 months as Satyam was trying to find its own feet and ensure that on the bottom line they were still collecting money and getting a positive result. So I would think that the employees will be, both employees and customers should be very pleased.
As we understand, an official release is expected, or a press conference is expected only at about 4 o'clock from Tech Mahindra. We also understand, and this is source-based information, that at this point Tech Mahindra is leaning towards keeping both the companies as separate entities for at least a year to stabilize operations. While I take Professor Verma's point, then it would be a bit odd if Tech Mahindra sort of tried to spite one against the other.
No, I don't think that was what Professor Verma was saying. He was only suggesting where the business interest of Tech Mahindra would lie. It's not about pitting one against the other since they have ownership control over both. He was only outlining the fact that it is more prudent. It's like a company which owns 100% subsidiary and then a listed subsidiary in another country and chooses to do more business through the 100% subsidiary rather than the listed subsidiary because it does not have full ownership of that company. So, in that whether Tech Mahindra would book more business under its listed Tech Mahindra name and what that would mean for the guy who owns the Satyam stock. The parent is the same now. Tech Mahindra owns both businesses. It's like favoring your son over your adopted son, if you will. So it's pretty much that what Professor Verma was referring to. But on the other point, which Som was talking about, I think those are important things because we tend to be quite focused on the stock market and its implications. But I think the business implications are very, very immense on two counts. One, the positive spin-off, because I think what has happened today, I mean, you can criticize anything. I mean, you can criticize the level of disclosure which had happened to the clients, etc., which they seem to be a bit unhappy with, and whether there could have been more disclosed and therefore a better price arrived at. So we can go on splitting hairs. The problem is, or the issue is, that this was a difficult transaction to consummate in the current environment, and the fact that the board got it done in 3 months, I think is quite a feat. Now, whether they could have got 70 rupees with more disclosures, I think you can debate. But this sends out a very positive signal to a lot of people in the West who were watching this extremely closely. Because you will recall when the Satyam episode happened, there was a lot of consternation amongst people who are investors into India, people who do business in India, about what this means in terms of the corporate governance and disclosure practices of India Inc. B, whether there will be more skeletons which will tumble out of the closet. And C, what is the ability of the system to deal with a disclosure of a fraud of this magnitude. And I think the bigger takeaways, I think Satyam will get settled. Whether the stock settles at 52 rupees and they get 20% in the open offer is not the moot point. The moot point is that the guy who's watching us from the global space today goes back today saying, okay, they had a big fraud. We didn't hear of many more frauds in the next 3 months which followed. Could they do a transaction? The board acted swiftly. The government took over the reins, appointed a good board. The board did a process which was fairly fair and transparent, and therefore at the end of 3 months they could hand over Satyam, which might have disintegrated completely had it not been the case, to a technology player at what seems to be a reasonably fair price under the circumstances. And therefore it should reassure a lot of people in the West that A, all Indian companies are not fraudulent companies, they don't cook their books. B, whenever a fraud is unearthed, the ability of the system, the government, of individuals in India to deal with a problem of such a big magnitude is quite good. And I would go to the extent of saying that the Satyam episode has probably, with today's conclusion, been dealt with far better than the US has been able to deal with many of the scams that has been unearthed in the last 2 or 3 years. It is supposed to be a far more efficient system than ours, but I think what has happened with the Satyam episode probably actually beats a lot of the US handling of many of the scams, and we should take a little bit of credit for that as well, because as Indians we tend to be extremely cynical about any process that happens in our country. But I think this has been a reasonably good process, reasonably swift, and we should take some credit on at the end game of it. That is the bigger takeaway than what happens to the L&T stock right now, and even the Tech Mahindra stock beyond the point for my money.
So you want to come in on that? Because that would be a concern, I imagine, for a lot of clientele and people you've been speaking with for the IT industry. And in the first place, the 3 names that came up weren't riff-raff. There was L&T, there was a Cognizant Wilbur Ross combination, and there's the winner, Tech Mahindra.
Well, all the 3 companies were good, and I think either one of them would have been good for customers and employees. And in this particular case, Tech Mahindra probably saw higher value and gave whatever price is now being accepted. But the point is that in this case, and you've seen the case of Enron, we have seen the case of Lehman Brothers, where we could not move swiftly and the company imploded. And in this particular case, if the company had imploded, we would have lost face with a lot of customers who depend on us for their mission critical services. Employees would have lost their jobs in this difficult environment, and we have saved that business. So I think it is a matter of pride for us. But I don't think we're going to leave it here. NASSCOM has formed a corporate governance and ethics committee. It's being led by Mr. Narayan Murthy. We have people like Mr. Damodaran, Mr. Vittal. We have Onkar Goswami, Deepak Satalwarkar, besides members of the industry. And I think we're going to take this forward, because this code of conduct is not only to be limited vis-a-vis disclosures to stakeholders, etc., but I think we need something as we're getting more global with customers, with our own employees, with competition. And I think we are more energized now with this particular swift dealing that we would set up probably a new standard itself for our industry to work in. So we are very